She saw everyone ignore the mute daughter of the Mafia boss until she spoke to her through sign language. Everyone in the restaurant ignored the girl who desperately moved her hands, but Sarah knew sign language and responded. The child's eyes lit up as if she had just received the entire world. What Sarah didn't know was that her father was the city's most feared Mafia boss, and her kindness had changed all their lives forever. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps above Sarah's head as she stirred her lukewarm coffee for the third time in 10 minutes. Mickey's Diner wasn't exactly the type of place that would appear in any tourist brochure for downtown Chicago. But at 1:47 in the morning, it was one of the few places still serving something that resembled food. The red vinyl upholstery was cracked with age, and the checkered floor had seen better decades, but it was warm, and more importantly, it was far from her empty apartment where the silence seemed too loud. Sarah had been coming there for weeks, since the nightmares started keeping her awake. The night shift waitress, Linda, barely recognized her anymore, just filled her coffee cup and left her alone with her thoughts. That night seemed different, though. There was an electric tension in the air that made Sarah's skin tingle. That's when she noticed her, a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, sitting alone in the corner booth, farthest from the door. Her small hands moved frantically in the air, forming shapes and gestures that Sarah recognized immediately. Her heart tightened as she watched the child desperately try to get the attention of anyone who passed by, the cook, the waitress, even other customers going to the bathroom. But each person looked right through her, their faces contorting with something that seemed almost like fear. Sarah frowned. The girl was well dressed in an expensive pink sweater and pressed pants that probably cost more than Sarah earned in a week at her data entry job. Her dark hair was carefully combed, and despite the late hour, she seemed fully awake, but there was something in her eyes, a deep sadness that no child should ever carry. Sarah wondered why everyone was ignoring that child. She watched as Linda approached the girl's table with obvious reluctance, her usually rude attitude replaced by something that looked suspiciously like terror. The girl's hands moved again, faster this time, more urgent. Sarah could see her forming the signs for please and help. Her little face wrinkled with frustration. Linda backed away without taking the order, shaking her head and murmuring something low before quickly walking away. That was enough for Sarah. She had learned American Sign Language 15 years ago, when her younger sister Jennifer was born profoundly deaf. Even after Jennifer's death in that car accident 3 years ago, Sarah never forgot the language that connected them. She had promised Jennifer that she would never let it disappear, that she would always be ready to help someone who needed it. Standing up on shaky legs, Sarah walked through the restaurant, acutely aware of how each conversation seemed to die as she passed. The girl looked up when she approached, her dark eyes widening with surprise when Sarah slid into the booth in front of her. Sarah greeted her softly, then raised her hands and signed, asking what her name was. The transformation was instant and heartbreaking. The girl's entire face lit up as if someone had just turned on the sun. Her hands flew into motion, signing so fast that Sarah had to gesture, asking her to slow down. The girl signed that her name was Sophia, tears forming in her eyes as she asked if Sarah could understand her. Sarah signed back, confirming yes, that she could understand her perfectly, her own throat tightening with emotion. She asked if Sophia was okay and where her parents were. Before Sophia could answer, the restaurant's front door opened with such force that the little bell above it flew off its hook and fell to the floor. Sarah's blood turned to ice when 6 men in dark suits flooded the entrance, their hands conspicuously hidden inside their jackets. The few remaining customers immediately threw themselves to the floor or dove behind booths, and Linda let out a small scream. But it was the 7th man who made Sarah's heart stop completely. He was tall and broad-shouldered, maybe 40 years old, with steel-grey eyes and a face that could have been carved from granite. His black hair was perfectly combed back, and his charcoal suit probably cost more than Sarah's car. When he walked, everything and everyone seemed to bend away from him, as if he were a force of nature. This wasn't just dangerous, it was power in its purest and most terrifying form. The man's gaze swept across the restaurant with the precision of a predator until it landed on the corner booth. His expression shifted from cold calculation to something Sarah couldn't fully identify: relief, fear. When he saw Sophia, he moved with purpose, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor like a countdown. Sarah's instinct screamed at her to run, but Sophia's small hand had found hers across the table, and she couldn't abandon her, not when she had just found someone who could understand her. The man stopped beside the booth and slowly knelt down next to Sophia, his massive frame somehow managing to look gentle as he reached out to touch the girl's face. He murmured with a voice carrying a slight Italian accent that made it sound like velvet wrapped in steel, telling the girl that she had scared him. Sophia's hands began to move excitedly, signing something to the man that Sarah realized with shock apparently could understand her. But then Sophia pointed directly at Sarah, her little face beaming with joy as she signed something that made the man's grey eyes turn to Sarah's face like a laser. The temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees as those steel-grey eyes studied Sarah with the intensity of a microscope. She felt like a butterfly pinned to a board, completely exposed and utterly trapped. The man asked calmly who she was and how she knew the girl's language, his voice carrying easily through the now silent restaurant. Sarah's mouth went dry. Every instinct told her to lie, to run, to do anything except tell the truth to this obviously dangerous man. But Sophia's hand was still in hers, warm and trusting, and she could see the hope in the child's eyes, hope that someone finally understood her. Sarah managed to whisper that her name was Sarah Mitchell and that she had learned sign language for her sister. The man's eyes never left her face. Behind him, his men had positioned themselves at every exit, and Sarah realized with growing terror that no one was leaving that restaurant until he said so. The man repeated her name as if testing how it sounded on his tongue. Then he smiled, and it was somehow more frightening than any frown could have been. He introduced himself as Marcus Stone and declared that Sarah Mitchell had just become very interesting to him. The silence that followed Marcus's words stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears as she watched that man, Marcus Stone, study her with a kind of focus that made her feel like prey. Marcus calmly ordered everyone out, not taking his eyes off Sarah. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout or threaten, but the effect was immediate and absolute. The few customers who were hiding behind booths dragged themselves to the door as if their lives depended on it. Linda dropped her coffee pot, which shattered across the floor in a spray of ceramic and caffeine, before practically running toward the back exit. In 30 seconds, the restaurant was empty, except for Sarah, Sophia, Marcus, and his 6 men, who had positioned themselves with military precision around the perimeter. Sarah noticed that none of them looked directly at Sophia. Their eyes seemed to slide away from the girl, as if she were invisible. Sarah wondered what kind of life that was for a child. Marcus said they would now have that conversation properly, sliding into the booth next to Sophia with fluid grace. The girl immediately nestled against her father's side, but her eyes remained fixed on Sarah with desperate hope. Sarah's hands trembled as she placed them flat on the scratched Formica table. She explained that she worked at Morrison Data Services downtown and had learned sign language because her sister Jennifer was born deaf. Her voice cracked slightly on Jennifer's name, the way it always did. Marcus noticed the past tense and asked about the sister. Sarah forced herself to meet those steel-grey eyes as she explained that Jennifer had died 3 years ago in a car accident, and that she continued with sign language because she had promised she would. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, just a flicker, but Sarah caught it. For a moment, the granite mask slipped, revealing something almost human underneath. Sophia tugged on her father's sleeve and began signing rapidly. Sarah watched Marcus's face as he followed his daughter's words and was impressed by how gentle his expression became when he looked at the girl. This was clearly a man who loved his daughter desperately. Sophia signed, asking her father to thank Sarah, saying she was the first person who talked to her as if she were real. Marcus's jaw tightened as he translated that Sophia said Sarah was the first person who treated her as if she existed. His voice carried a weight of years of frustration and pain, asking if Sarah had any idea how rare that was. Sarah looked at the girl, then back at Marcus, declaring that people were idiots. Deafness didn't make someone less human, neither did being mute. Marcus agreed, but added that being his daughter did. The words hung in the air like a confession. Sarah felt pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place, the fear in everyone's eyes. The way people avoided Sophia, the armed men, the expensive clothes, and the dangerous father. Sarah swallowed hard and asked if he was in the Mafia. Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. Among other things, he gestured to one of his men, ordering them to bring the car. They were leaving. Sarah protested that she should go home, that she had work in the morning. Marcus cut through her objections like ice, declaring that she would come with them. Sarah began to slide out of the booth, saying she wasn't going anywhere with him, but froze when she realized all 6 men had subtly shifted position, blocking every possible escape route. Sarah declared that he couldn't just kidnap her. Marcus responded calmly that he wasn't kidnapping, he was making an offer. Sarah asked what kind of offer. Marcus looked at Sophia, who was watching the conversation with wide, worried eyes. The girl's hands moved quickly, asking if Sarah was in trouble because of her. Marcus signed back that no, that Sarah was going to help them. Then he turned to Sarah, explaining that his daughter hadn't had a real conversation with anyone in her entire life, except him, and even he was limited, having learned only basic signs after she was born. She saw how Sophia lit up when she talked to her. Marcus continued before Sarah could respond, saying that Sophia didn't trust anyone. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow felt louder than shouting. In 8 years, she had never trusted a single person outside of him. No bodyguards, no tutors, no nannies. Nobody. His grey eyes bored into hers. Until that night, until Sarah. Sarah's mouth went dry as she asked what he was saying. Marcus leaned slightly forward, and Sarah caught a scent of expensive cologne mixed with something darker, gun oil perhaps. He declared that his daughter needed Sarah, and what his daughter needed she got. Sarah protested that he couldn't just take her. Marcus responded that actually he could, his voice turning to velvet wrapped in steel. In his world, when something precious and rare appeared, something that could keep his daughter safe and happy, he didn't let it slip away. He stood up, extending his hand to Sophia, who took it without hesitation. Marcus explained that his daughter didn't trust anyone, and now Sarah had no choice either. 2 of Marcus's men flanked Sarah's booth. They didn't touch her, didn't threaten her, but their message was crystal clear. Sarah whispered that this was insane, that she was nobody, worked data entry, and lived in a studio apartment with broken air conditioning. She ate instant noodles for dinner and shopped at thrift stores. She didn't belong in his world. Marcus paused at the restaurant door, Sophia's hand still safely in his. When he looked back at Sarah, there was something almost like regret in his expression. He admitted that maybe not, but his world had just become hers, whether she liked it or not. As Sarah was gently but firmly escorted toward the door, she saw Sophia looking back with absolute trust and joy, repeatedly signing thank you. She was entering a world of wealth and danger that she could never have imagined, and there was no way back. The wrought-iron gates of the stone property opened silently as the black SUV approached, revealing a world Sarah could never have imagined existed in the Chicago suburbs. The mansion loomed before them like something out of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of limestone and dark windows surrounded by perfectly manicured grounds that probably cost more to maintain than Sarah earned in 5 years. But it was the subtle details that made Sarah's stomach clench with dread. Security cameras tracked their movements from every angle, Men in dark suits patrolled the grounds with the practiced efficiency of soldiers. The windows weren't just darkened, they were bulletproof, thick enough that Sarah could see the telltale distortion around the edges. This wasn't just a house, it was a fortress. Marcus commented calmly about welcome to their world as they stopped at the circular drive. Sophia had fallen asleep against her father's shoulder during the 20-minute drive, her small face peaceful in a way that made Sarah's heart ache. The front door opened before they even reached it, revealing a stern-faced woman in her 50s, wearing an impeccable black uniform. Her graying hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her pale blue eyes swept over Sarah with obvious disapproval. Marcus nodded to the woman, introducing her as Mrs. Romano, and informing her that Sarah Mitchell would be staying with them. Mrs. Romano responded formally that the guest room in the East Wing had been prepared, her voice carrying a slight Italian accent and absolutely no warmth. Her gaze slid to Sophia, still sleeping in her father's arms, and Sarah saw something cross her face. Not affection, not even basic human concern, but something closer to resignation mixed with fear. As they entered the foyer, Sarah was struck by the cold grandeur of it all. Marble floors reflected the light from a crystal chandelier that probably cost more than her apartment building. Oil paintings in heavy gold frames lined the walls. Stern-faced men, who all bore some resemblance to Marcus, watching with disapproving eyes. But despite all the wealth on display, the house felt empty, lifeless. Marcus said that Maria would show her room, gesturing to Mrs. Romano, and that they would discuss the arrangements tomorrow. Sarah found her voice and asked what arrangements he was talking about, what exactly he expected her to do there. Marcus paused at the foot of a grand staircase, Sophia still in his arms, and responded simply that she would help his daughter, give her what everyone in that house had failed to provide, a childhood. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. As Marcus carried Sophia upstairs, she followed Mrs. Romano through hallways lined with more security cameras and silent, watchful men. Everyone they passed averted their eyes from her, but Sarah could feel their curiosity and fear radiating like heat. Mrs. Romano finally commented that the girl usually didn't bring strangers home as they climbed to the second floor. Sarah asked if she was referring to Marcus, but the older woman clarified that she was referring to little Sophia, who was particular about people and didn't attach to anyone. Most of the staff found her difficult. Sarah stopped walking and asked what she meant by difficult. Mrs. Romano's face closed off immediately, saying it was nothing for Sarah to worry about, and opening a door to reveal a bedroom larger than Sarah's entire apartment, decorated in soft blues and whites, with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Sarah asked the housekeeper how long Sophia had lived like this, surrounded by people afraid of her. Mrs. Romano's knuckles turned white as she gripped the doorknob, explaining that that girl was Mr. Stone's heir, and that everything she touched became dangerous, whether she meant it to or not. The staff did their jobs, kept the girl safe, but getting close to her wasn't safe for anyone. After Mrs. Romano left, Sarah sat on the edge of the impossibly soft bed and tried to process what she had gotten herself into. Through her window, she could see guards patrolling the grounds, their movements choreographed and deadly serious. What kind of life was that for a little girl? She was still sitting there an hour later when she heard it, a soft knock on her door. When she opened it, Sophia stood in the hallway wearing Superman pajamas, her dark hair tousled from sleep. The girl signed that she couldn't sleep and asked if they could talk. Sarah looked around the empty hallway, then stepped aside to let her in, signing that of course they could. Sophia perched on the edge of a chair too big for her, her legs swinging freely, and signed that everyone there was afraid of her. They did things for her, but never talked to her. Not really. They looked at her as if she were broken. Sarah's heart shattered. She knelt down in front of the girl, bringing herself to her eye level, and signed that Sophia wasn't broken, that she was perfect exactly as she was. Sophia responded that Daddy said that too, but he was the only one. Sarah signed back that well, Now she had Sarah too. For the next hour, Sarah did something revolutionary in that cold, sterile mansion. She made Sophia laugh. She told silly stories, played simple games with her hands, and taught new signs that had nothing to do with orders or instructions or fear, just pure, joyful communication. When Sophia laughed, really laughed at her impression of a grumpy cat, Sarah felt something shift in the house around them. It was subtle, but she was being watched. From the doorway hidden in shadow, Marcus observed his daughter's transformation with growing unease. In one evening, that woman had given Sophia something he had been searching for her entire life: normalcy, joy, the simple pleasure of being understood and accepted without fear. But in Marcus's world, happiness was a liability, love was a weakness, and Sarah Mitchell was rapidly becoming both. 30 kilometers across the city, in a smoke-filled warehouse, Tony Romano ended a phone call with a satisfied smile, telling his assembled crew that the boss had a new weakness. First the girl, now a woman who could talk to her. His lieutenant asked what the play was, and Tony's smile turned predatory as he answered that they would take both. 3 weeks into her new life at the Stone property, Sarah had established a routine that both terrified and exhilarated her. Every morning, she found Sophia waiting outside her door with her backpack and an eager smile, ready for lessons that bore no resemblance to traditional education. Instead of math and history, Sarah taught how to express emotions she had never been allowed to feel. Instead of reading textbooks, they created stories with their hands about brave knights and talking animals. Most importantly, she taught that her thoughts and feelings mattered, something no one had ever bothered to tell her before. That day, Sarah signed that they would learn about feelings as they sat in the mansion's vast library, surrounded by leather-bound books that probably hadn't been touched in decades. Sophia signed back that she knew feelings: happy, scared. Sarah agreed those were good starts, but asked about frustrated, excited, proud. Sarah demonstrated each sign, watching Sophia's eyes widen with recognition. The girl signed excitedly that she felt frustrated when Mrs. Romano ran away when she tried to ask for cookies, excited when Sarah taught new words and paused, her little face scrunching in concentration, proud when Daddy watched them and smiled. Sarah's hand stopped. She asked if Sophia's father watched them. Sophia nodded enthusiastically, signing that every day he stood in the doorway and watched them. He thought she didn't notice, but she always did. A flutter of something Sarah didn't want to examine too closely stirred in her chest. She had been acutely aware of Marcus's presence over the past weeks, the way conversations died when he entered a room, the way his staff moved around him with choreographed precision, the way his rare smiles transformed his entire face when he looked at his daughter. But she hadn't realized he was watching her work with Sophia. Sarah asked what his face looked like when he watched. Sophia signed that it looked like he was seeing something impossible, like when they watched movies and the good guy won, even though it seemed impossible. That evening, Sarah got her confirmation. She was in the kitchen making a late snack for Sophia when she heard voices from Marcus's office. The door was slightly ajar, and 2 men were speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Sarah heard one man say that the Romano family was making moves, that Tony had been asking questions about his daughter, about her routines. Sarah froze, a jar of peanut butter halfway to the counter. Marcus's voice was deadly quiet, asking what kind of questions. The man responded about her schedule, security details, where she went during the day. And boss? The man's voice dropped even lower. They were asking about the girl too, the one who talks to her. Sarah's blood turned to ice. She pressed herself against the kitchen wall, straining to hear more. The second man continued saying that Tony thought the girl was Marcus's weakness, that he was planning something big, thought that if he could get the girl, he could force Marcus out and take the territory. There was a long silence, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice carried the kind of cold fury that made Sarah's skin crawl. He said to let Tony try, that anyone who touched his daughter would die slowly. The other man asked about the girl, that she wasn't protected like the kid. If Tony was smart, he'd go after her first. Sarah didn't wait to hear Marcus's response, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran through the mansion's hallways, taking the stairs two at a time until she reached Marcus's office. The door was still ajar, and she could see him standing behind his massive desk, his face carved in granite as he listened to his men's reports. Without thinking, Sarah pushed through the door. Marcus's expression shifted immediately from cold calculation to surprise. His two men, Danny and someone she didn't recognize, stepped protectively in front of their boss, hands moving toward concealed weapons. Sarah said breathlessly that she had heard, that she was in the kitchen and heard them talking about Tony Romano, about plans to hurt Sophia, to hurt her. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus studied her face with laser intensity, and Sarah realized she had just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. She had voluntarily involved herself in his dangerous world. Marcus asked calmly how much she had heard. Sarah responded with a cracked voice that enough to know that Sophia was in danger because of her, that she should leave if her presence there put the girl at risk. Marcus's voice cut through her words like a blade saying no. He moved around his desk with fluid grace, stopping just inches from where she stood. This close, Sarah could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, could smell his expensive cologne mixed with something darker. Marcus declared that she wasn't leaving, but that Tony Romano was a dead man walking. And he reached out and gently touched her face, his fingers surprisingly warm against her skin, had just proven something he wasn't sure he could trust. Sarah asked what, and Marcus responded that she would risk her own safety to warn him about a threat to his daughter, his thumb tracing across her cheekbone as Sarah felt her breath catch, that she would choose them over her own freedom. Sarah's heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. She started to say that of course she would, that Sophia was special. And she stopped, not knowing how to finish that sentence. Marcus's expression softened in a way she had never seen before. For a moment, the dangerous Mafia boss disappeared, replaced by a man who looked almost vulnerable. Marcus declared with a voice carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow that from that moment forward she was under his protection, that no one would touch Sarah. Not Tony, not anyone. The way he said her name sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Marcus called Danny without taking his eyes off Sarah's face, ordering him to double the security detail and spread the word that anyone who so much as looked at Sarah wrong would answer to him personally. As his men left to execute his orders, Marcus's hand was still cupping Sarah's face, and she realized with startling clarity that she was no longer just Sophia's teacher. She was falling in love with her father. 2 days after Sarah had rushed to warn Marcus about the Romano threat, she made a decision that would change everything. Sophia had been cooped up in the mansion for weeks, her lessons confined to the sterile perfection of rooms that felt more like a museum than a home. The girl needed sunlight, fresh air, and the simple joy of being a normal child, even if just for an hour. Marcus said absolutely not when Sarah brought up the idea during breakfast. He was dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair still damp from his morning shower, looking every inch the powerful businessman rather than the Mafia boss she knew him to be. Sophia signed from her seat at the enormous dining table pleading please, saying she wanted to see the ducks at Lincoln Park, that Sarah said there was a pond where they swam. Marcus's grey eyes softened as they always did when he looked at his daughter, but his jaw remained set. He said it wasn't safe, not right now. Sarah argued carefully that it could be, asking what if they brought security, kept it short, just an hour. She declared that Sophia was 8 years old and had never simply played in a park. The words hit their target. Sarah watched Marcus's face as he processed what she had said, that his daughter had never experienced something as simple and fundamental as playing in a park. The guilt and pain that crossed his features made Sarah's chest tighten. Marcus finally said 1 hour, full security team, and that Sarah stay within 10 feet of Danny at all times. Sophia's face lit up like the 4th of July. Lincoln Park on a Wednesday afternoon was perfect, quiet, peaceful, with just a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the crisp October air. Sarah sat on a bench, watching Sophia feed breadcrumbs to a family of mallards, her entire body vibrating with excitement as the ducks paddled closer to shore. Sophia signed to Sarah with wonder that they weren't afraid of her, that they came right up to her. Sarah signed back that animals were smart and knew she had a good heart. Danny and 3 other men in dark suits had positioned themselves around the small pond with military precision, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. To anyone watching, they probably looked like Secret Service agents. But Sarah had learned to read the subtle signs, the way their hands hovered near concealed weapons, the way they communicated with tiny earpieces, the way they never relaxed, even for a second. She was so focused on Sophia's joy that she almost missed the jogger who passed by their bench for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Almost. Sarah's pulse quickened as she noticed other details she had overlooked before. The maintenance worker who had been fixing the same trash can for 20 minutes. The woman with the baby stroller who kept circling back toward them. The van parked across the street with tinted windows. Sarah called Danny calmly, but before the bodyguard could respond, everything exploded into chaos. The jogger pulled a gun from his waistband and fired 3 rapid shots at Danny, who dove to the ground, drawing his own weapon. The maintenance worker and stroller woman suddenly produced automatic rifles from their equipment, and the van's doors burst open, disgorging 6 masked men in tactical gear. Danny roared to get down, but Sarah was already moving. Sophia was frozen at the pond's edge, her small face white with terror as gunfire erupted around her. Sarah sprinted across the grass, her only thought to get to Sophia before the masked men could. She tackled Sophia just as a spray of bullets chewed through the bench where she had been standing moments before, rolling both of them behind a large oak tree. Sophia was shaking uncontrollably, her hands moving in frantic, terrified signs that Sarah couldn't decipher through her own panic. Sarah whispered that it was okay, pressing Sophia's face against her shoulder so she couldn't see the violence erupting around them, saying she had her, that she wouldn't let anyone hurt her. Danny and his men were outnumbered, but not outgunned. The sound of automatic weapons echoed across the park as they fought back with professional precision. Sarah saw Danny take a bullet in the shoulder but keep firing, saw another of Marcus's men go down hard behind a park bench. Then she heard the screech of tires as more vehicles arrived, but these weren't reinforcements for Marcus's men. Someone shouted ordering them to get the kid, and Sarah looked up to see 2 masked figures flanking their position. She didn't think, simply reacted, throwing herself in front of Sophia just as one of the men fired. Sarah felt a line of fire tear across her left side as the bullet grazed her ribs. The impact spun her around, and in that moment of disorientation, rough hands grabbed Sophia and yanked her away from her. Sarah screamed no, lunging forward despite the blood spreading across her shirt. One of the masked men backhanded her across the face, sending her crashing to the ground. Through blurred vision, she saw them dragging Sophia toward a black SUV. The girl's terrified eyes locked on hers as she signed desperately for help. Sarah tried to get up, tried to run after them, but her vision grayed out and she collapsed onto the grass, her own blood pooling beneath her. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness was the squeal of tires as they took Sophia away. When Sarah woke up 6 hours later in a private hospital room, the first face she saw was Marcus's. He looked like he had aged a decade in the span of an afternoon. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt stained with what looked like blood, and his grey eyes burned with a fury that made her shrink back against her hospital pillows. Sarah whispered that they took her, and the words felt like swallowing glass, that she tried to protect her, but they took her. Marcus's hands were shaking, actually shaking, as he reached out to touch her face, saying that Sarah had taken a bullet for his daughter, that she had thrown herself between her and armed men without hesitation. Sarah responded with tears streaming down her face, that it wasn't enough, that she was gone because of her, because of the stupid ducks. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt louder than shouting, declaring that she was gone because of Tony Romano, a dead man who just didn't know it yet. He stood up, straightening his jacket with movements that looked almost robotic. Marcus said he would burn that city to the ground until he found his daughter, and when he did, Tony Romano would learn what happened when you took everything that mattered to Marcus Stone. Through the hospital room window, Sarah could see smoke rising from 3 different locations across Chicago's skyline. The war had begun. The warehouse smelled of rust, motor oil, and fear. Sophia sat huddled in the corner of a windowless room, her wrists bound with zip ties that cut into her small hands every time she tried to move them. The single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling cast harsh shadows that made the masked men look like monsters as they paced back and forth, speaking in low voices about ransom demands and territorial negotiations. But Sophia couldn't hear their words. She could only see their lips moving, their gestures growing more agitated as the hours passed. What terrified her most wasn't the gun one of them carried, or the way they ignored her desperate attempts to communicate. It was the absolute silence of her world, made even more isolating by the knowledge that no one there would ever understand her. Sophia thought desperately of Sarah, her small hands forming her name in sign language even though no one was watching, wondering where she was. Across the city, Sarah was staging her own rebellion against Marcus's protection. She had been discharged from the hospital that morning against medical advice, the bandages across her ribs pulling tight with every movement. Marcus had immediately installed her in a safe house with 6 armed guards, strict instructions not to leave under any circumstances. He had underestimated her determination. Sarah told Danny, who was stationed outside her bedroom door with his arm in a sling from the park shooting, that she needed air just on the balcony. Danny nodded, his face grim with exhaustion, saying 5 minutes and then back inside. Sarah stepped onto the small balcony and immediately began studying the fire escape that zigzagged down the building's side. The guards were watching the front entrance, the elevator, and the stairwells, but they had overlooked the most obvious route. 10 minutes later, she was on the street, adrenaline overriding the pain in her side as she hailed a taxi. The driver asked where to, noticing her hospital bracelet and the way she moved carefully. Sarah responded the docks and that she'd pay double if he didn't ask questions. During the ride, Sarah's mind raced through every conversation she had had with Sophia about her life before her arrival. The girl had mentioned playing a game with her father, where they practiced emergency signs, specific gestures that only they knew, designed for situations where silence was crucial. Marcus had taught that if she was ever in trouble and couldn't make noise, she should use the old signs, the ones from when Daddy was little like her. Sophia had shown Sarah some of these signs during their lessons, giggling as she demonstrated this secret language she shared with her father. Italian Sign Language, older variations that predated modern ASL. Sarah had been charmed by the father-daughter bond it represented. Now those same signs might be Sophia's only way to communicate with rescue. Sarah had another advantage. 3 weeks living with Sophia had taught her to think like her. The girl was fascinated by water, always drawing pictures of boats and harbors. When she was scared, she gravitated toward places that reminded her of safety and escape. The warehouse district near Lake Michigan stretched for miles, but Sarah started with the buildings closest to the water, those where a terrified 8-year-old might imagine boats that could carry her home. She found her on her 4th attempt. The building looked abandoned from the outside, but Sarah noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt and cigarette butts that hadn't been weathered by rain. More importantly, she saw movement behind a second-floor window. Just a shadow, but it was small enough to be a child. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she studied the building's layout. 2 guards at the front entrance, 1 walking the perimeter. She needed a way in that wouldn't alert them to her presence. The loading dock on the building's east side had a broken window just large enough for someone Sarah's size to slip through. The glass cut into her palms as she pulled herself inside, but she bit back any sound that might give her away. The warehouse interior was a maze of stacked crates and abandoned machinery. Sarah moved through it like a ghost, following the sound of voices toward the back of the building. When she finally found the room where they were holding Sophia, she nearly cried with relief. The girl was alive, scared, but alive. Sarah positioned herself near a gap in the wooden crates, where she could see into the room without being seen. 3 men, all armed, all focused on a phone conversation with someone who was clearly giving orders. One of them said the boss wanted the kid delivered by midnight, that if Stone didn't cave by then, they'd send him pieces of her. Sarah's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to focus. Sophia was sitting against the far wall, her dark eyes darting around the room as if searching for escape routes. Even bound and terrified, she was thinking, planning, exactly as her father had taught her. Moving carefully, Sarah positioned herself where Sophia could see her through the gap in the crates. She waited until the guards were distracted by their call, then began signing in the old Italian variations Sophia had shown her. "Little Wolf," Sarah signed, using the pet name Marcus called his daughter. "I'm here." Sophia's eyes went wide, but to her credit she didn't make a sound or sudden movement. Instead, she began signing back with tiny, careful gestures that wouldn't attract attention. 3 men, 2 guns, one has keys to the car outside. Her small hands moved with precision despite her fear. They're waiting for Daddy to call. They want to trade for something. Sarah signed back asking if she could move quietly. Sophia signed yes, but her face became urgent. "But Sarah, the man with the scar is coming back. He went to check the perimeter. He'll be here soon." Sarah felt her blood turn to ice. A 4th man, one she hadn't accounted for, and he was already on his way back. Sarah signed for when she gave the signal to get ready to run, that no matter what happened, she should run to the water and hide, that her daddy would find her. But even as she signed the words, Sarah knew they would both probably die in that warehouse. She was one unarmed woman against 4 armed men, wounded and running on pure determination. It didn't matter. She wouldn't let Sophia face this alone. Just as Sarah was preparing to create some kind of distraction, Sophia's hands moved in frantic warning. "Behind you." Sarah spun around to find herself face to face with a man whose scarred face she recognized from Marcus's security briefings. Tony Romano himself, pointing a gun directly at her head. Tony said with a cold smile that, well, looked like Marcus Stone's little girlfriend came to play hero. Tony Romano's scarred face twisted into a satisfied smile as he kept his gun trained on Sarah's forehead. He commented that he was expecting Marcus himself to come charging in like some kind of action hero, but instead he got his daughter's babysitter. Sarah forced herself to meet his eyes, even though her knees felt like they might give out, and said to let the girl go, that his fight was with Marcus, not with an 8-year-old child. Tony responded that, but she was wrong about that, taking a step closer. Through the gap in the crates, Sarah could see Sophia watching with wide, terrified eyes. Tony explained that the girl was the key to everything. Marcus's weakness, his soft spot. Tony's gaze slid to Sarah, commenting that it looked like he'd developed another one. From inside the room, one of Tony's men shouted that they had movement on the perimeter, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Tony's smile widened, declaring right on schedule, and that it seemed Daddy Bear found their little hiding spot. He pressed the gun against Sarah's temple, the metal cold against her skin, explaining how this would work, that she would walk into that room nice and slow, and then they would all wait for Marcus to come save his precious family. Sarah's mind raced as Tony forced her toward the room where Sophia was being held. Through the broken windows, she could hear the distant rumble of engines, multiple vehicles moving fast. Her heart soared with desperate hope, even as Tony's gun never wavered from her head. But it was the sound that came next that made Tony's confident smile falter, the sharp crack of sniper fire from somewhere outside the warehouse. One of Tony's men shouted, asking what the hell that was, while another called out that Jimmy wasn't responding on radio, neither was Tony at the front entrance. Tony's grip on Sarah tightened, declaring it didn't matter, that they still had the kid and the girl, that Marcus wouldn't risk losing them. But the warehouse's front wall exploded inward. The blast was deafening, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying across the space. Through the smoke and dust, dark figures poured through the breach with military precision. Sarah glimpsed muzzle flashes and heard the controlled bursts of automatic weapons as Marcus's men systematically cleared the building. But it was Marcus himself who appeared through the smoke like an avenging angel that made Sarah's breath catch. Gone was the carefully controlled businessman in the expensive suit. This was Marcus Stone in his true element, dressed in tactical gear, carrying a military-grade assault rifle, his grey eyes burning with a fury that could have melted steel. He moved through the warehouse like death itself, every motion calculated and lethal. Marcus said Tony's name, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade, declaring he was there for his daughter, to send her out, and maybe he'd let him live. Tony shouted back that he wasn't in a position to make demands, dragging Sarah into the room where Sophia was being held. His remaining men took defensive positions behind overturned tables and machinery. Marcus said he had his girl and his girlfriend, that one wrong move, and they both died. Marcus appeared in the doorway like a nightmare made flesh, his weapon trained on Tony, ordering him to let them go and he'd make it quick. Tony laughed, pressing his gun harder against Sarah's head, asking if Marcus thought he scared him. Sarah saw her chance when Tony's attention shifted to Marcus. In one desperate motion, she drove her elbow into Tony's ribs and dove towards Sophia, wrapping her arms around the terrified girl, just as gunfire erupted throughout the room. Tony's men opened fire on Marcus's position, but he was already moving, rolling behind cover as his own men flanked the room from multiple angles. The sound was deafening. Automatic weapons shouted orders, the crash of equipment being destroyed by bullets. Sarah pressed Sophia's face against her shoulder, shielding her with her body as debris rained down around them. She could feel the girl shaking against her, her small hands clinging to Sarah's shirt as she tried to make herself as large as possible between her and the violence. Sarah whispered in her ear that she had her, even though she knew Sophia couldn't hear her over the gunfire, saying it was going to be okay. A bullet whizzed past Sarah's head so close she felt the heat of it and embedded itself in the wall behind her. Another shattered a wooden crate just inches from where they huddled. Through it all, Sarah kept herself wrapped around Sophia like a human shield, absorbing the impact when falling debris struck her back and shoulders. The firefight seemed to last forever, but in reality it was probably less than 2 minutes. Marcus's men were professionals, and Tony's crew were street thugs with more ego than training. One by one, Tony's men fell until only Tony himself remained, wounded and cornered behind an overturned table. Marcus called out, declaring it was over, ordering Tony to come out. Tony snarled, telling him to go to hell, but Sarah could hear the fear in his voice now. What happened next would be burned into Sarah's memory forever. Marcus stepped into the open, completely exposed, his weapon lowered. For a moment, Sarah thought he had lost his mind. Tony still had a gun, was still dangerous, but then she saw the cold calculation in Marcus's eyes, the way he moved with absolute confidence. Tony took the bait. He rose from behind his cover, gun raised, triumph flashing across his scarred face. Marcus was faster. The single shot was precise, final. Tony crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering away harmlessly. In the sudden silence that followed, Marcus's mask finally dropped. His hands were shaking, actually shaking, as he ran to where Sarah and Sophia huddled against the wall, falling to his knees beside them, reaching out to touch his daughter's face, asking if they were hurt, if they had been injured. Sophia's hands began to move excitedly, signing Daddy, that Sarah had saved her, that she had jumped in front of the bullets. Marcus's grey eyes found Sarah's, and what she saw there took her breath away. Not the cold Mafia boss, not the calculated killer, but a father who had nearly lost everything that mattered to him. Marcus whispered that she could have died, his hand gentle as he touched the cuts on Sarah's face from flying debris. Sarah whispered back that he could have too, And in that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence in a dusty warehouse, Sarah realized she was looking at a man who would burn the entire world to keep his family safe. The question was, when had she started thinking of herself as part of that family? The stone mansion had never felt more like a home than in the golden light of dawn. 3 days after the warehouse, Sarah sat curled in the library's window seat, watching Sophia play in the garden under the watchful eyes of her bodyguards. The girl was different now, not broken by her ordeal, but somehow stronger, more confident in the way she moved through the world. Maybe it came from finally understanding that she was worth fighting for. Sarah's ribs still ached from the bullet graze and the debris that had rained down on her in the warehouse. But seeing Sophia's joy made every moment of pain worthwhile. She was currently trying to teach one of the younger guards basic sign language, her small hands moving with patient enthusiasm as the burly man fumbled through the alphabet. Sarah turned to find Marcus standing in the doorway, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. Gone was the perfectly pressed suit, replaced by dark jeans and a simple black sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. His grey eyes held a warmth she was still getting used to. Sarah asked what he meant by, she had never done that before. Marcus entered the room, settling into the chair across from her window seat, explaining that for 8 years, signing was something private between them, her secret language that no one else could understand. Now he gestured toward the window, where Sophia was laughing at her students' attempts to sign thank you. She wanted to share it with the world. Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion, commenting that Sophia wasn't hiding anymore. Marcus agreed quietly that no. His gaze shifted from his daughter to Sarah's face, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken, asking if Sarah knew what she had given her. Sarah responded that she didn't know what he meant. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he searched for the right words, explaining that for 8 years he had watched his daughter disappear a little more each day. She was there, breathing, alive, but she was fading away like a ghost. No one saw her, no one heard her, no one tried to understand who she really was underneath the fear. Sarah's heart clenched at the pain in his voice. Marcus continued saying he learned sign language the day she was born, bought every book, hired every teacher, practiced until his hands cramped. But he could only give her words. Sarah had given something far more precious. Sarah asked what that was, and Marcus's voice broke slightly as he answered a voice that Sarah had given his daughter a voice in a world that had decided she was invisible, that she had made her real again. Tears blurred Sarah's vision as she watched this powerful, dangerous man struggle with emotions he had probably never allowed himself to feel before. Marcus said he needed to ask her something, standing up and moving to the window where he could see Sophia playing, and that he needed her to think carefully before answering, because once he asked it, there was no going back. Sarah's heart began to race as she said, "Okay." Marcus turned to face her, and she was stunned to see vulnerability written across every line of his face. This wasn't a mafia boss or the calculated businessman. This was just a father who had nearly lost everything. He said simply, "Stay," not as Sophia's tutor, not as someone he was protecting because she helped them. Stay, as he struggled for a moment, then forced himself to continue. Stay as family, real family, mine and hers. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious and terrifying. Marcus continued saying he knew what his world was, what he had done. He knew he was asking her to tie herself to something dangerous and dark and complicated. But Sarah, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, saying she was the missing piece they didn't even know they needed, that she made them whole. Sarah stood up slowly, her entire body trembling as she moved toward him, asking if he was asking her to marry him. Marcus responded in a rush that yes, he was asking her to be Sophia's mother and his wife, and the heart of whatever kind of family they could build together. He was asking her to take all of them, the good, the bad, the dangerous, and let them be hers. Sarah's breath caught. Through the window, she could see Sophia had stopped her lesson and was watching them intently, her dark eyes bright with hope. Sarah whispered yes, and the word felt like coming home. Marcus's expression transformed, relief and joy, and something deeper flooding his face. He stepped forward and cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing across her cheekbone, as if he still couldn't believe she was real, asking if she was sure. Once she was part of that family, he would never let her go. Sarah whispered back that she didn't want him to. The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, full of promises and hope, and the fragile beginning of something beautiful. They were interrupted by the library door slamming open as Sophia barreled into the room, her face flushed with excitement and her hands moving frantically. Sophia signed to both of them, asking if they were getting married, if they would be a real family. Sarah knelt down to her level, her hands steady, as she signed back asking if that was what she wanted. Sophia's response made both adults freeze. She signed mother, looking directly at Sarah. Then she turned to Marcus and signed father. Her little face was radiant with joy as she signed that now she had a mom and dad, a real family. Marcus's composure finally broke completely. He fell to his knees beside Sarah and pulled both her and Sophia into his arms, holding them as if they might disappear if he let go. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Stone, feared by enemies and respected by allies, a man who controlled an empire built on power and violence, felt truly at peace. Outside the library windows, the morning sun painted the mansion's grounds in gold, and for the first time, the fortress felt like what it had always been meant to be, a home.